Hi, welcome to Latte Art Fundamentals. In this video, I'll discuss best practices for mug handling while pouring, some basic latte art concepts, and then 4 techniques that will serve as a foundation for learning to pour latte art. First, let's talk mug handling. It may not seem that complicated or important, but it's something that I pay a lot of attention to when I'm pouring drinks or watching other baristas pour drinks. It's pretty typical for baristas to pour with their dominant hand and hold the mug with their non-dominant hand. And when I talk about mug handling, what I'm talking about is the technique that baristas use to hold the mug while they're pouring. My recommendation for best practices in mug handling while pouring is to get comfortable holding the mug by the handle, either with your finger through the hole of the handle or pinching the handle with your thumb and index finger. This is going to be a better way of holding the mug while pouring, in my opinion, for a few reasons. The first reason for this recommendation is a pretty big one. If you hold the mug by the handle, you can be sure that you're not going to contaminate any part of the mug that someone's going to drink out of. So this one is a big one for me. I often see baristas making the mistake of touching the mug or vessel from the rim where customers are going to be drinking out of the mug. And that's just a bad, unsanitary habit for baristas to have. My other main reason for preferring the handle as a way of holding the mug while pouring is it speeds up your workflow a little bit, because it means that you can immediately set this down on a saucer or on the counter and serve it, as opposed to setting down your milk pitcher and then transferring the mug to your other hand and then setting it down. Finally, when we get to pouring latte art designs, one of the things that we're going to pay attention to is the orientation of the design relative to the handle of the mug. And I find that holding the handle while I'm pouring helps me better judge the orientation of the design. So I'm not saying it's totally necessary that you hold the mug by the handle while pouring. I do think it's a good habit to build if you're just starting out, but a lot of baristas are more comfortable holding the mug by the bottom while pouring. If you're doing that, just be careful to handle the mug in a sanitary fashion. Don't put your fingers further than halfway up the side of the mug while pouring. Next, let's talk about latte art concepts. So when we pour latte art, there are a few features of well-poured art that we look for. The first feature of well-poured latte art is contrast. When we pour latte art, we are using white milk to produce a design in brown espresso, and a good design will maintain a contrast between those two colors. The second feature that I pay attention to is positioning. So if we look at the surface area of the vessel, the design should be relatively centered. It should also be perpendicular to the handle, and the design should also be proportionate to the surface area of the vessel. Finally, for a lot of designs, a good pour will be symmetrical. So for the designs I'll show you in this video, they will be mirrored across the north-south axis of the vessel. And that brings me to my next point. In order to more easily discuss these designs and how to produce them, it's helpful to have a consistent language for orientation. So I use compass points to describe orientation on the mug. I hold the handle at the east and use my dominant hand to pour from the north. And as I produce a design, the design will be oriented with the bottom in the south, the top in the north, and mirrored across the north-south axis. Finally, before we get to specific techniques, the variables that we're going to have control over while pouring are primarily the height of the pitcher relative to the surface of the espresso, the horizontal position of the pitcher relative to that surface, and then finally the speed at which we're pouring. So those 3 things are essentially going to constitute the different techniques that I'm going to show you. The first technique that I want to show you is what I call laying a foundation, which is exactly what it sounds like. With this technique, we are essentially preparing a surface in the espresso for us to pour our design on top of. Mastering this technique is going to be really beneficial as you practice latte art, because this is essentially going to be the first half of any latte art pour. And mastering this will help us maintain good contrast between our espresso and our milk. To lay a foundation, you're going to tilt your mug with the espresso in it at about a 45-degree angle. This gives you the largest possible surface area to pour into. And with your pitcher, you're going to pour from 3 to 4 inches above at a relatively slow rate, and you're going to pour directly into the espresso, avoiding the sides of the vessel. And what this does, if you pour from a few inches above the surface of the espresso, it allows the milk to hit the surface with enough speed that it will cut through the espresso and lay a solid foundation below, maintaining a nice brown color on the surface. If you happen to have any white spots that lay on the surface of your espresso, you can carefully direct the path of your milk into those white spots and cause them to sink below the surface. Throughout the foundation laying part of our pouring process, we will maintain a pitcher height of about 3 to 4 inches and maintain a relatively slow flow rate. Once the mug is about 50% full, we'll carefully tilt the pitcher up to stop the flow of milk. And it's useful to note that the lower the foundation is in the cup before you start pouring your design, the larger the design can be. So you don't want the cup to be full with the foundation, you want it to be 50% or lower. So now that we have a foundation, we now can pour a design on top of it. The first technique that I want to show you for pouring a design is called placing. Placing is one of the simplest techniques that's going to allow us to produce a nice looking design on top of the foundation that we've just poured. So while laying the foundation, we've been pouring slowly from a few inches above the surface of the espresso, and then we typically pause. To place a shape on that foundation, we're going to lower the pitcher as close as possible as we can get to the surface and increase the speed of our pour. And for placing a shape, we're not going to move the pitcher at all side to side. We're just going to direct the spout of the pitcher directly into the center of the espresso. When you lower your pitcher to the surface of the espresso and increase the speed of your pour and pour directly into the center, you'll start to see a design forming pretty much immediately. And you'll just keep pouring into the center and tilt the mug up as it fills. Once it's completely full, you'll tilt your pitcher up to stop the flow of milk, and you'll see that the design has formed on its own. The milk will spread out over the surface of the espresso and form what's called a semi-cardioid shape, or what we typically call a monk's head design. The next technique that I want to show you is called pulling through. The pulling through technique builds upon the placing technique that allowed us to pour a monk's head design. The pulling through technique will allow us to form a point on the south side of the mug, turning the monk's head design into a heart design. So the pulling through technique is a very common way to conclude a pour. As you make that pull through motion along the north-south axis, there's a couple things that you're going to do. One is that you're going to be slowing the flow of your milk just slightly, because you're going to be concluding your pour once you reach the south side of the cup. The other thing that you're doing is raising the pitcher just slightly and pouring from a couple inches above the surface of the drink. This is going to help the milk hit with enough speed to cut through the design and help you form a fine point at the conclusion. The last fundamental technique that I want to show you in this video is called pushing. We can combine pushing with placing and pulling through to create a layered heart or tulip design. The pushing technique starts off with placing, so we will lay a foundation and then lower our pitcher to the surface and increase the speed of our pour. But instead of keeping the spout of the pitcher in one place, we are going to push the spout of the pitcher as we pour from the north to the south side of the mug. Pushing from the north to the south as we pour will cause the design to spread out around the southern hemisphere of the mug and will also clear space in the northern hemisphere. Pushing from the north to the south allows you to layer several designs together. So as you reach the south side of your mug, you can pause your pour, move your pitcher spout slightly to the north, place and push another design and pause, and repeat those steps as many times as you can. And then finally, with the last pour, you can pull through, and that will form a layered heart or tulip design. So those 4 techniques, laying a foundation, placing, pulling through, and pushing, are a solid foundation for pouring latte art. Mastering those 4 techniques will allow you to pour a monk's head, heart, layered heart, and tulip design.